Hello there ladies and gentlemen, TX141 here, also known as Paul, welcoming you to some all new Ground Forces gameplay for the realistic mode of War Thunder. In today's episode I shall be featuring the Panzer III Ausf M, a German light medium tank coming in at a battle rating of 3.7. To provide you with a very quick history behind this tank, we have to consider the fact that it was introduced in parallel with the L variant as of 1943. Both tanks were an attempt at modernising the Panzer III by changing the gun, a 50mm cannon, from its stubbier version as seen on the ENF, to a longer barrelled version known as the 50mm Kampfwagen Cannon 39L60. The premise behind this was to improve the muzzle velocity of the 50mm armour-piercing cap shells and therefore provide more effective penetration power when attacking a target. In addition to this, the tank also saw the addition of side skirt armour, or spaced armour, both along the sides of the hull plate and around the sides and rear of the turret, and this was only to the M variant. The L variant saw an absence of this. Whilst this meant that on the M, high explosive anti-tank rounds and hollow charge rounds in general were less effective at penetrating through the sides of the tank, this also increased the weight and therefore dropped the top speed. The M is attributed to having the lowest top speed of the Panzer III variants, especially by comparison with the L, its sister tank with the same gun but lacking this armour. Ergo, when we consider the history behind the tank, we can realise why I've put this video together. For a battle rating of 3.7, on some occasions you will find that in realistic mode this tank will be thrown into games up against tanks such as the T-34-85 or the earlier iterations of. And sometimes you can feel as though you're going up against the odds in a tank that technically needs to be at close to medium ranges, I say 100 metres to 500 metres, to actually penetrate a target effectively. Meanwhile, your opponents with their 85mm cannons and calibres of high value are able to knock you out of distances of a kilometre or more. Indeed, even the 75mm or the 76mm on the Shermans can prove rather difficult at medium ranges by comparison with your own gun's firepower. Even then, when you are able to get into an effective range against a target and therefore penetrate them, the low calibre nature of the gun means that sometimes you will have to put 5 or 6 shells into a target to actually achieve the kill or the crippling blow. Meanwhile, your opponents with their larger calibre cannons are able to knock out most of your modules, if not destroy you, in a single shell. So there is quite a bias here, some would say, towards this tank being rather ineffectual. And the fact that you have the peripheral vision of the third person view in realistic mode, this also means that flanking is technically very difficult to do, unless you can find incredibly steep ridgelines. Our push towards the south on the domination version of the map, Poland, has proven rather effective so far. We have managed to gradually move ourselves along the side of a friendly Tiger 1, as our team pushes towards B. And as we push back towards the ridgeline here with the house, we are doing this through fear of the fact that there may be some enemy tanks just over that ridgeline that if we come out wide will be able to spot us thanks to the peripheral vision of the third person view. So, hugging this ridgeline a little bit more, we are going to see soon that our fears are confirmed. As we come along, we spot a 105mm Sherman and M4A3, and we have to instantly think to ourselves that they may have seen us as well. And this is about to be confirmed. As we carry along, we come down into a deeper ditch, and we begin to look up. We realise that there are multiple enemy tanks just over this ridgeline, and if we can spot them, they can spot us. Most notably an M24 Chaffee who comes charging along. So we compose ourselves and put our first shell right in underneath the gun manlet. This kills off some of the crew and we can finish them off with a successive shot, taking out the transmission and the final crew members. By holding our composure there and using our very fast reload rate, we were able to cripple and destroy that light tank without much difficulty. So we can see already how the fast fire rate of our 50mm cannon can prove effective once we are able to get our shots in on target. And as we continue to push around on the flank, now that we have our position secured, we realise that the majority of the enemy team down this side of the map has been knocked out. The only potential threats are on the northwestern front of the map, about 1.5 kilometres away, and so we push round on the side of this 105 Sherman. We notice their profile, and we aim along the side and put a shell in, achieving our second kill. Whilst most of the damage had probably been done by the rest of our team, our final shot there secured the kill by knocking out the final crew member, so we are making a valuable contribution nonetheless, and we are proving that you can flank in this tank even with the limitations provided. With no enemy tanks now in this sector of the map, we can begin to come out into the open, pushing beyond the tree line here and trying to fire off some shots, or intending to fire off some shots I should say, on the enemy tanks coming out of their spawn and trying to push towards the other capture points on the map, most notably A. We see another 105mm Sherman trying to push across an open field, and so we try to range in a shot. Our first one misses, and we fire a second one very quickly thanks to our reload rate. That one misses as well, but we can see how we can range in our shots very rapidly, and we are about to really highlight this against an M4A3 Sherman I believe. Our first shot goes directly in on the front plate at a very skewed angle, which means we do not penetrate. Our second shot on what is actually an M4A3 hits the same spot, doing a minimal amount of damage, but we can see how in effect we can range in quickly by comparison with say a Tiger 1 who's got their extended reload. We see two more tanks crossing over on the other side of the lake, and we fire our first shell. We do not see where it goes, and we begin to reverse out of perhaps fear of the tanks coming out of the spawn on our side of the lake. Our second shell goes over, and we find that it just goes over the enemy rear, and so we fire third, but they start to move. Again, putting our reload to good use, we fire a fourth, and we now need to give additional lead as the Sherman starts to move. We land our shell directly in where the turret joins with the hull plate, achieving our third kill. And then we see an anti-air gun coming across the field as well. We land our first shot square into the hull, achieving our fourth kill. So we can see, thanks to our fast reload and also the nice muzzle velocity of the 50mm, we are able to get through the front points of our targets even if they've got quite a bit of armour. If we can land a shot in an exposed weak point, such as where the turret joins with a hull plate, we can guarantee ourselves a good portion of damage and perhaps even a kill on a more armoured opponent. And so now we push out on the flank once again. Reason being that whilst a good portion of our friendly tanks have managed to secure the frontier, we have to be fearful of the fact that with the enemy tanks coming out of spawn, they may notice us in position and aim for us rather than say a Tiger 1, in order to clutch off what would be perhaps an easy kill. So we proceed to a more outward ridgeline once again. We are miles away from our opponents, but we still have to be conservative here. We have the speed to continually relocate, and we should bear in mind that this tank in this gameplay is practically stock. Whilst it is advertised with a much higher top speed of approximately 43 to 48 km an hour, if my memory serves me correctly, we are only able to obtain approximately a top speed of 35 to 38 km an hour for the time being, and our performance over small ridges is rather limited. But nonetheless, we press on, and we can see really now that this game is entering its adolescence. We have all 3 points under our control, and the enemy team is really being constrained to its northern spawn rather than its southern spawn. So here, as we look over the distance, we cannot see really any targets worth our time. So we are gradually going to push up, always being wary of the fact that something new may spawn in. But at the same time, really, this is the end of this first game. And so, rather than bore ourselves to death by continuing to watch as I gradually progress across this field, timid of the fact that tanks may spawn in, we are now going to skip towards the stat screens. Ergo, we can see that our 4 kills allowed us to obtain 9,555 silver lines. On top of this, we accreted 897 research points, with 1,157 going towards our research on the Tiger II. We hereby conclude this first game by summarising the Panzer III M as an effective flanker. We were able to attract the attentions of an M24 Chaffee as we pushed round on the southern flank, knocking them out thanks to our high reload rate and the precision of the 50mm cannon. We could then continue by knocking out the M4A3 Sherman from the side, or the rear side I should say, and whilst that tank was crippled, it was still combat effective, demonstrating our contribution nonetheless. We then pushed a little bit further forward and demonstrated the ranging capabilities of the 50mm cannon thanks to its high fire rate and distinct armour-piercing cap tracer, by knocking out an M4 Sherman at extended distances of a kilometre or more. The kill shot was rather fortunate. It landed into the turret ring once the Sherman had turned towards us, and so we cannot credit that as a demonstration of the overall firepower of the 50mm gun. but we were able to translate our ranged in shots to achieve our 4th kill on the AAA battery. And it is because of this that we can see that our score was 9th on our team. And whilst this is not a high position, we have to expect it thanks to our technical handicap of a battle rating of 3.7 and a lower calibre gun by comparison with our battle rating 5.7 friendlies such as the Tiger I H1 with their larger calibre 88mm guns, if not significantly more. Nonetheless, with this first gameplay out of the way, I now intend to show the Panzer III M in a bit more of a static situation, whereby it's sandwiched between a rock and a hard place, and we're going to have to make the most of what we are given, and try to exploit the situations presented to us when they arise. So, with our locale now changed to the conquest iteration of the map Kursk, we realise straight away that this map is very different from the one we previously fought on. Kursk is a wide and open map, featuring very few but rather prominent ridgelines and depressions such as that where the capture point A is featured today, i.e. in the squares E5 and F5. As a result, this means that for the most part, the engagements are at longer distances, i.e. 1.5 to 2 kilometres, and end up being essentially sniper brawls, where players have to range in their shots and hope to outmatch their opponent in terms of their ability to gauge where they're shooting. Straight away, I decide to try and go for the western flank, i.e. along the 1-2 line on the map, but I very quickly change my mind and start heading eastwards instead, although I am also going to change my bearing once more very shortly. The reasoning behind this is because whilst this tank is an effective flanker as we have already depicted, by having a wide and open map, it will only be a matter of time before 1 or 2 enemy tanks latch onto my encroaching presence and try to range shots into me, and if one of those does hit, it will most likely knock me out of the game. Even due to my speed and perhaps my small profile, one shot only has to go in, and it's not a risk I want to take. So as I start to push up this eastern hill, I realise that if I carry on this path, a similar incident may occur, because I'm pushing up onto open ground. So instead, I decide to head towards the capture point. Odd, rather confrontational, but the premise and the idea behind this is that if I head towards the capture point and support the friendly Panther Ds, Panzer IV Hs and the Tiger I H1s, perhaps I will go unnoticed, because I'm thinking what would I do in this situation if I was to see a Panzer III M go over a hill and a Tiger I go over the hill and both look towards me. If I was in a Joseph Stalin 1 for example, I would instantly prioritise the Tiger I, because I know that can penetrate me, meanwhile the Panzer III M has got to have an incredibly well aimed shot in order to even potentially damage me and knock out modules. So, reversing this logic onto my playstyle, I start to push up onto the initial ridgeline. As we can see, I'm along the front line of friendly tanks. I'm not going too far forward, and at the same time I'm not staying too far back. Just by using the peripheral vision here of the third person view, we can see a large array of enemy tanks also doing a similar tactic to our team. Everybody here wants to play for that capture point, and that's what makes Conquest mode on Kursk such an interesting mode, because sometimes it does lead to these rather brutal brawls at distances of 1 kilometre to 1.5, which end up with a good portion of both teams being knocked out, and you really do get to see those who understand the ballistics of tank shells shining through. So, rather than go over the ridgeline, I decide to come off it a little bit and re-engage at a different position. I see a friendly captured KB-1B moving up as well, and so I decide to move along with them. There are a number of AI tanks as well towards the western side of the map, and I believe I'm about to try and take some pot shots at one in order to A, depict the rather poor penetration of the tank, but also to highlight the ability for the tank to range in rather quickly. And this is also a very helpful way for me to gauge distances on a given map. I believe I am firing at the side of a T-34-76 here, and within 2 shots I've already realised that the range is approximately 1.6 kilometres. Perhaps I need to drop it a little bit more, but we're getting close to the target, and thanks to our very fast reload we can range in a lot faster than perhaps say a Panzer IV H or indeed a Russian T-34. So we continue, and with our 7th shot I believe here, we range in on the side of the turret. We can't penetrate because of the limited penetration at this distance, wearing out to approximately I would say 40mm, if not a little bit higher, say 50, but at the same time it's always a good accuracy practice technique. And we score a little bit of damage on the T-34 suspension, although very soon I'm going to give up on this concept and press on, now that I know the approximate distance across the map. So, seeing a couple more AI tanks there, I decide not to let them distract me any further. This has also given time for our friendly, player-controlled tanks, i.e. the heavy tanks and the mediums with the better guns, to push forward and start to contest the central point of the map. And this gives me some time to prepare myself to move into a position on the front line. I see a large confluence of friendlies all gathered up just to my left, and so I decide instead to break over the ridgeline to the right. Risky, but I need to take a different approach, otherwise I'll just be a sitting duck if any close air support is called in. And so as I begin to make my way over the first ridgeline towards A, I keep looking around, because the enemy team could be anywhere. They could have pushed a Chaffee up to the front line. I got underneath the ridge that we're currently on. But soon I see an M4A3 Sherman and a KV-85 in the distance. I cannot tell if they'll be able to see me very well, so I push forward a little bit further and start to look over a small ridge. Something which works well with the Panzer III M's low profile. And thanks to our rather decent gun depression as well, it means that we can always bring our gun down in order to gauge the theory, can we be shot and can they shoot us? And we see a Joseph Stalin 1 who is heavily engaged by some friendly tanks, and so we are able to press forward. And technically here we are engaged in a flanking manoeuvre, although it is a limited one because of the KV-85 just down the road. And so here I'm having to keep my eyes on both sectors. What is on my side, i.e. what I'm trying to flank, such as this Jumbo Sherman, and those who are ahead of me, such as the KV-85. I try to land a shell into the turret ring of the Jumbo Sherman, and I manage to accrete myself a kill, putting it into the side of the tank and knocking out the crew. Whilst the Jumbo Sherman does have a lot of armour at the front, if you can hit it in the side towards the front where the ammo rack is located and where the crew are, you can get a kill even with a lower calibre gun. So with 1 to our name and a successful flanking manoeuvre completed, we begin to push on and try to create another pocket for us to complete. We know the KV-85 has got to be looking this way because a friendly tank has just fired over towards them, and the logic says if a tank does take a ricochet shot, the player's attention will be looking towards where the shot came from, or at least that's my theory. And so we found ourselves a nice little depression here, which means we can now dissect the enemy team into 2 halves. We come round on the side of a Joseph Stalin 1 who is completely oblivious to our presence. We come a little bit too far into a bush, and we start to fire into the side of the Joseph Stalin. Now it's very difficult to do any damage here because the armour is slanted, and I'm aiming way too far forward on the tank. But look at what is occurring. The Joseph Stalin is pulling back. And the reason for this is not because we are doing damage, but because of the intimidation factor that we provide. Think of it this way. If you're sitting in your heavy tank out in the open and you start taking shots from the side, whether they are penetrating or not, if they are coming in at 1 every say 4 seconds, if not 5 seconds, what are you going to think at this point? Sit there and die? Or potentially die I should say? Or run, pull back? And that Joseph Stalin 1 there paid dividends to the concept of pulling back under pressure, meaning that we picked up an assist when our opponent's tank was not able to withstand the shells from our friendlies who are able to use the distraction to their advantage, as the Joseph Stalin would have had to have realigned their future shots. And we tried to push a little bit further on towards this KV-85, but this player is a little bit wiser. They are already pulling back and they are turning their gun towards us, or at least their turret, in order to ricochet the shells, thanks to the fact their turret is well rounded. We have a shell fire back at us, but we are able to use our low profile and the small depression we are reversing into to dodge the incoming fire. So at this point I think to myself, okay, well we can't go any further forward, but we have done our job. A has been captured, thanks to the fact our friendlies pushed up and we were able to provide a little bit of distracting fire on the enemy tanks, or at least those that could contend the position. Here we are trying to drop a shell onto an M24 at distance, yet we are not having any luck. Our ranging is rather poor here, and as we try to find the range of our 5th shell, the M24 very quickly becomes aware of what we are doing. Our 6th shell comes in, and the M24 starts to reverse. In the meantime we start taking fire from the AI controlled anti-tank guns, which, unless they get to close range, do not seem to do much damage from my experience, and so I can ignore them partially. Reversing up the hill now that the M24 has had to break its location, or at least relocate, we see an enemy Year 2 ACH-30B trying to drop bombs on friendly tanks. And as they try to break around in order to drop a bomb on myself, I reverse back to avoid the incoming bomb load. And, maintaining my composure, I look up towards the Year who has had to flatten out after their manoeuvres in their bombing run, and retaliate, taking them out for my second kill. If a Year or a bomber of or any fighter I should say, or aircraft of large profile is flying on a straight line, a little bit of well-timed accuracy, such as there, aiming just underneath where the plane is going, may allow you to actually take down the aircraft. Of course, if it was say a Yak-7B, they most likely would have been a very difficult target to hit. But nonetheless, with artillery fire being dropped in our general location, we decide to change up, avoiding the barrage and at the same time making sure that our opponents, if they are trying to drop any more artillery payloads onto us, are unable to do so. And it's at this point that I notice a friendly Panther sitting out in the open and perhaps trying to push forward. But it turns out that elusive Chaffee from earlier has actually flanked them. And so, with the Panther in a bit of trouble, I decide to try and help out. But of course I have to rearrange my shots. But not too much, because I already did the ranging when I first fired on the Chaffee. And so I land 2 shots straight away in, knocking out the cannon barrel. And once the M24's got behind the Panther, they can't actually take the Panther out anymore. So I can just begin to drop shells in at my heart's content. 4th shell over, and I achieve my 3rd kill, knocking out the final 2 crew members, before putting a winky face to the Panther to tell them that I've got their back. So, reversing around now, and heading back towards the battlefield, or the new front line I should say. Our job has been done here. We have assisted our team in pushing forward and creating the front line in order to hold off the enemy from capturing the main point of the battle. We look at an enemy IL-2 here, flying over, making sure to keep an eye on them and perhaps have the opportunity of landing a 50mm shell onto them. They are currently chasing down a friendly Dornier 217 E4, and they knock it out accordingly. But our team has also spawned in a couple of anti-aircraft batteries, and another Dornier 217 is about to get revenge. We try to practice a little bit of long-range anti-air shooting, but nothing successful comes of it. And so at this point, I decide just to push back down the line, carry on looking at the IL-2 because that is the only threat in my mind at the moment if it comes around for another pass. And I make sure to keep my eyes open on any other ground attack aircraft which could potentially attack myself. As I am on a hill, I've always got the ability to drive down the hill at a speed of approximately 55 km an hour, which is a very nice top speed for this little vehicle, and dodge any incoming fire. Now, with the enemy aircraft out the way, we push back towards the capture point, return to safety, and know that our mission has been accomplished. And I believe very little happens for the rest of this game. I keep an eye on the map, noticing another ground attack aircraft flying over. And as I look up, I cannot see it down low. It turns out a B-25 Mitchell has also come around. And here I just make sure to keep track of the B-25, and that I am not a sitting duck for them to drop a bomb on myself. I once again try to line up a quick shot, but as we can see, my initial luck, or fortune I should say, on the Year 2 is not going to be reciprocated here. As the Mitchell flies below the horizon, knocks out a friendly flak unit, and then tries to come around. Their right engine is gone, so it's only going to be a matter of time before they now go into the ground or have to return to base for repairs. But again, trying to shoot at enemy aircraft, while it may be fruitless at extreme distances, is also a good means of practicing your ability to lead a target, especially in ground forces. Although this Mitchell here is running out of time on their engines. So, as a result, we try to push down the hill once again, and we notice a good portion of our frontline team of much heavier tanks is now pushing towards the enemy spawn point, or at least the eastern spawn point. And so, we push forward to the next ridgeline and try to get perhaps another assist, or even a kill. We see an M4 Sherman retreating against a Stug, and so we begin to open fire. Our first shot kills off the gunner, and what this means is we've now guaranteed ourselves an assist. We miss with our second shot, overcompensating for their reversal, and we put a third shot into the back, partially damaging perhaps a fuel tank. Our fourth goes into a ridgeline, showing a little bit of variance on the accuracy of the gun here, and our fifth goes over, because we are having trouble gauging the Sherman against the ridgeline here, and this is something I need to work on. Our 6th shell goes into the turret, but the overall spalling effect does nothing to take out the tank. And so, the Sherman continues to retreat, and we try to pop a shell or two over the ridge, but nothing is effective. We pick up the assist anyway, thanks to a friendly Panther knocking the Sherman out, and we can now say that we have 3 kills and 1 assist to our tally. At which point, the game has clearly been clutched into our team's hands, and so we may just enjoy the scenery as we push forward in the final seconds of the game. We can also see how, whilst we had a minor contribution, perhaps it was a very key one, and perhaps if we hadn't assisted in distracting that Ausf to Stalin 1, and if we hadn't put a little bit of additional pressure on that KV-85, the battle could have gone quite differently. Although that is merely theorising, and not an actual conclusion we can take from this. And so with the game at its end, let's now take a look at the post-game stats. Hence, we can see that our single aircraft destroyed, 2 ground units and 2 assists allowed us to obtain 10,205 silver lines, and on top of this we accreted 1,020 research points, with 1,316 going towards our continued work on the Tiger II. We hereby conclude this second and final game for today by realising that the wide flank approach is not always the most advised one. Sometimes a more confrontational and concerted frontline approach in the Panzer III M can work to your advantage. Initially we were hesitant. We stuck behind a key defensive ridgeline and allowed our heavier friendly tanks to push forward and engage the enemy fire. At which point, when we felt confident, we kept our composure and we pushed forward into a number of small depressions, which worked well with the manoeuvrability and the low profile of this tank. We were then able to complete a pair of pocket flanking manoeuvres, one on a Sherman Jumbo, which we executed and got ourselves a kill, and the second one on a Ausf Stalin 1. We put a large amount of pressure on the heavy tank and forced them to eventually retreat, misalign their shots and be knocked out by a friendly tank. We attempted a third on a KV-85, but they grew aware of our presence, and so instead we sent our attentions towards a friendly Panther D, who came under fire from an M24 Chaffee at a long distance but down a hill, and by being in the forward position that we were in, we were able to support them as well. And at the same time, our great manoeuvrability in this tank also enabled us to dodge the bomb load of that Ur-2, whilst reversing ourselves into a position whereby we could fire back and knock them out with a fortunate and aimed shot. So, perhaps this gameplay goes to show, as we see we came 9th on our team, with a limited score but one that showed our role in the game, that perhaps it's not always what you have, but it's how you use it. And so with that being said, if you have enjoyed this video, why not leave a like, comment or subscribe for future War Thunder videos on my channel. Yet until next time, ladies and gentlemen, take care and good luck on the battlefield.